No representation is better than misrepresentation. We believe that media plays huge roles in shaping the public opinion and perception on issues, and it's the same for the issue of criminal ways of life. Judge, when we wrongfully glorify such serious issues in ways that make things entertaining and fun for people. Things like when the TikTok, when TikTokers kill, pregnant women by driving over cars, like people will start, condoning that sort of behavior and normalizing, criminal behavior. We believe that that is when we know that the sense of morality has been eroded by the glorification of this criminal way. Our counterfactual, as government side, we would agree to portraying criminal ways of life with media. We have no problems with that, but we object that the glorification has played a good role in society. So we think that, in series that are available for the appropriate ages and given proper ratings, we support it, but we do not support the glorifications of such ways of living. This looks like, we think that glorification looks like, criminals earning a lot of money, being happy, portraying it as an entertaining experience. But on the other hand, it lacks all the serious consequences in real life that happens. So for example, you would not go to jail, just like how Walter White, was able to make millions of dollars in Breaking Bad. So if they are portrayed on our side, we want them portrayed realistically with clear legal consequences and showing that the chances of success in crime in the criminal career is astronomically minuscule. So the burden of today's debate is to prove that the glorification has caused more harm than good in current society. And we'll be doing this through two arguments. First, why media portrayal in series of criminal way of life is a misrepresentation. But then second, why this glorification leads to the normalization of criminal lifestyle and what impact it has on the legal structures and legal, norms of society. So first argument on why media portrayal of its criminal way of life is a misrepresentation. So we must first consider the incentives of the series, which the series, like Breaking Bad, they're a form of media. So first of all, a point of preemption, the opposition in today's debate is probably going to come into this debate and say that glorification of the criminal way of life in series has played a good role in terms of raising more awareness. We agree to a certain extent because like any type of media, these series earn money off of viewership. So we need to first establish that there are clear incentives to make it appealing for the most amount of viewers. Second, then we move on to why does misrepresentation then happen? 3 points. First, we believe that glorification is the act of romanticization, meaning that as I defined before, the consequences or negative aspects of criminal life, as we framed, will not be shown in this series. This looks like, Breaking Bad, which is literally about a chemistry teacher, Walter White, who is a father of two. He starts a multi-million drug business without much legal consequences he would have endured in the real world. But second, we need to also consider the purpose of the fictional shows. 2 reasons. First purpose for people, why people watch it is because it's fun. It's an entertainment. So it has to be fun and appealing. But what we tell you is that criminal life is not fun. It's not a thing that you should be entertained by. So what these media companies and series have to do is make that into a different story. They need to make it fun. But second, in terms of the purpose behind fictional shows, they have a lot of limits and representation because the show first has to cater towards what the audiences want. If the audiences don't want a story about Walter White, then they need to make a new show that caters toward their needs. But second, there's also legal regulations to the extent to representing these criminal lives. So you can't just show like half dead bodies on a show. Like it has to have some sort of limit. And that is why there are going to be, clear limits to like accurate representation. But finally, third layer, the media also has an incentive to keep things realistic up to a certain extent because people enjoy things that are relatable to them because anything that is completely new or made up often do not appeal to people. An example is, for example, even if I make a movie about aliens and space war, which obviously does not exist in real life, it needs to, in order for it to become popular among people, it needs to incorporate things like human aspects, like emotion, like how there's friendship also among aliens. There's a like love line, so people buy into it. And that is what the incentive of the media does. And that's the problem. It's because it looks like it's very realistic on the one hand, but also it's very fictional because of the clear limits that these incentive structures pose for these media companies that create series. But then finally, why is misrepresentation harmful? We believe that this comes in 2 layers. First, we believe that there's a clear lack of information about criminal lifestyle in society because there are no other ways for people to be exposed other than these series normally in society. Because first, there are clear legal consequences and there's regulations to the extent to which, like, if you expose the criminal's privacy without their consent or consent, we think, or like factual, like boring, and also we think that like factual and boring information also generally detracts audience from willingly watching such media. So there's limited ways that people can learn through this news. But second, that is why once glorification occurs, the more media companies opt into like producing these films, the movie will the prominent and superior exposure public have to the criminal way of living. So we believe that this impacts the ability to make meaningful change as well. And that is why misrepresentation is harmful. Because the premise of this point is that because people do not have other sources of information on criminal life, this show of Breaking Bad will be their main way of forming their opinion on this issue. That might seem like not intuitive at first, but we think that this impacts their subconscious. Like if someone asks you, what do you know about drug dealing? This is the only way that people have information information about this. So this has two impacts. First, people lose their ability to judge the crime because of the fact that normalization happens, which I'm going to talk about later. But second, even if that is not true, we say that and I say people still retain the ability to consider drug dealing and these cultures as a crime. They will be ineffective at solving issues because even if they raise questions to the legal structures and they raise awareness about issues, that's going to be the wrong type of problem. Any resources that are spent to solve those issues represented in the film are not representing the true problems that need attention in the real life. And before I move on to the argument, second argument, I'll take a POI.
In Breaking Bad, Walter White ends up divorced, loses connections to his children, and has to live in a camp car and becomes homeless.
Yeah, we agree. We agree, but then the wrong part of Breaking Bad is that it portrays the process of crime as something that can be successful. There are clearly people in that movie and in that show where they are shown successful. And also Walter White literally finds his the goal in life and meaning in life through selling meth in Albuquerque. So we don't think that even if it doesn't show the end goal as money and popularity, we think that the process of characterizing it that way shows a problem. Second argument quickly, why this glorification leads to normalization of criminal lifestyle. So first of all, the mechanisms. How does this glorification fit into current narratives of crime? So before glorification occurred in society, we think there were two sentiments towards crime. First, negative sentiment, because people believe that criminal lifestyle is dangerous because of the stereotypes and general disapproval of general harm and violence towards others. But B, there's a net neutral sentiment because people just don't know a lot about it. But then therefore, by placing criminal lifestyles in a positive limelight, glorification causes society to counter those original view of crime with a much more positive one. So why is this dangerous? We think that this leads to the normalization of crime because it no longer looks as bad or as dangerous as it usually seems. So this normalization therefore causes crime to become desensitized, because crime is no longer filled with just bad connotations. So even if Al tries to say that people will not take these films seriously because they are fictional, the positive connotation still exists. It subconsciously causes the public to think that the crime is not associated with the harmful effects. So why is normalization bad? As I said, it's going to decrease the shock factor, especially in countries where majority opinion drives the legal system like the US. We say the way in which general public reacts to crime is extremely, extremely important. And when glorification of crime way of living, such as drug dealers, were seen as okay in a normal life, we think that is when society fails in moral terms.
The reason we glorify crime is not to promote crime, but instead we glorify them to make people and to make the society criticize this action and let people know the miserable life that you'll be living if you choose to live a life like this. Hence, we're proud to oppose on this motion. In my speech today, I will first do the rebuttals, and then I will offer our team's two arguments, which is first, we show the fullest extent of crime and criticizes the life of this criminal by first glorifying them and then making the ending miserable. Second argument on how we humanize these criminals and show the causes of these criminals, and which at the end facilitates social discourse. Before that, the rebuttal. Opposition side today mentioned how a majority of these criminal movies shows that the glorification of these criminals, which is a problem. However, we say that this is in fact a better method of making people deter of doing this life. Why? Because we think that in Breaking Bad, Walter became rich. That's true, but at the end, he divorced. He started to use drugs, and his life became extremely miserable. I think that this result is what people are, or potential criminals are fear of. They don't want for potential criminals who are getting inspirations from these movies, they are afraid that their life will end up being like Walter or other criminals' life that become miserable. So we think that there's less likelihood for them to actually commit crimes because they don't want them to do so. And I also prove in my later argument on why media or these production companies have an incentive to make to make the ending of these criminals miserable. And secondly, they also said that this glorification normalize crime and will decrease shock factor. But I also think this is not true. Instead, we think it actually helped them. The reasons why is because we think that this creates a bigger contract of their life when you first glorify them and making them miserable. Because if you only portray the realistic life, for example, if you only show their life is always miserable, we think that this does not this has a less margin compared to when you first glorifying them and making them like being very successful, but later at the end you portray and you show the ending that they become very miserable. And we think that this makes people more fear about the ending of this criminal. If they choose to do the same thing. And hence, we think that glorification even if it is representation of what the reality is, we think that this still help the society to not do actions or become people like how these characters are being portrayed in these movie series. Now, move on to our first argument on why this glorification criticize these characters. We think that first, these movies has a incentive to make the ending miserable because the most receptive audience don't want or viewers don't want criminals to do well. For example, like if you are watching like a book or a movie where eventually the villain will definitely feel pissed off and you'll definitely feel angry because this is not what you expected. And people when they're watching, they want the main characters to be able to go well. And we think that's so we think that these companies have an incentive to make their movies to make the ending as miserable, to make the criminals who actually are bad and who commit crime to not do well. And secondly, is we just don't think like, for example, genocide games or a book that have negative endings don't end well. And those book that, for example, Hunger Games, where like the main character eventually beats the bad guy or take over the bad society are the book that sell well. So we think that these companies will have incentive to make these movies to make their life miserable and to make the bad guys bad at the end. I would think that majority of the movies out there are like factually, for example, the endings are miserable. For example, Walter White start to use drug and regret his life after. Jesse Pinkman, who initially is a rich and powerful person, eventually divorced and live in poverty. We think that the impact of this is that this reduced the probability of like potential criminals. Why? Because if you are like a criminal if you're a person who is very depressed and might want to get inspirations for them, we think that when they're looking at this information, they'll also take the consequences of doing this into consideration. For example, we think that this glorification eventually and the miserable ending. This miserable ending make them less likely to do this because they don't want their life to end up like this. And I will take your points.
If you think that glorification of shows will still show these people have harsh consequences like that, then could you define what glorification looks like in your world?
So, as I mentioned before, our side, glorification does not mean promoting crime. Instead, we show how their actions, for example, in the middle of the plot, like for example, what they're doing. They might be being successful, but we think that at the end will still show that their life has been miserable. For example, they will still fail at the end, which we think that the thing we want to portray is that these criminals will eventually end up as long as you are a criminal, your life will be miserable and not doing well. This is the glorification that we want to portray, not promoting crime itself. Now move on to our second argument on how this humanizes criminal and facilitate social discourse. We think that in a lot of the movies, these criminals are not just a bad person who have bad ideologies, but instead we think that there are also external factors that created these kind of criminals. For example, in Walter or in Joker movie, the moral story or the thing they want to convey is that it criticizes the United States healthcare. The reason is because Joker started to become crazy or started to become mentally unstable because the United States healthcare isn't serving its job properly and isn't providing the help to the most vulnerable person, which eventually led to the Joker that is very crazy. I would think that this same as Walter, where this person started to use drugs because he doesn't have enough money for his family when they have cancer. We think that all these, the movies creators want to do this because they want to convey information that the government also has some cost for creating these criminals. And we think that this also make people after this movie criticize the government and like also make a decision which forces the government to take actions to improve the society so that we don't have to create these people. And for all those reasons, we're proud to oppose.
Media is what is shaping, and will shape the public opinion. We posit that it is shifts in individual mind and perceiving criminals that make social changes at the end of the day in democratic countries more than proud to propose. Three things in my speech. First, general clarification on what glorification actually looks like, to several rebuttals, and finally an extension. First, on clarification, we don't think the opposition actually understands what glorification is in this motion. So let's clarify this. The info slide literally has the word entertainment in it. It literally tells us and gives us the fiat to say that the purpose of these films and media is not for education, is not for awareness, it is for entertainment. Meaning that it is very, very unlikely that this glorification itself will include factual information, because as they say, this is pretty boring and people are unlikely to, media does not have the incentive to use this. But also now let's go on to some rebuttals. First, their main point was that people will be able to distinguish between movies and reality, so and so. We have 4 rebuttals under this. First, factors other than criminal way of life makes the film believable. Meaning to say, other than dealing meth, Walter White has a family, has a job as a chemistry teacher, and goes through daily lives. Because everything other than criminal way is likely to be believable. That's why individuals are very likely to believe it. But second, as Waan already posited and we received absolutely no rebuttal upon, there's no exposure other than the media on criminal way of life. Using idea from their side that documentaries are boring, whatever, probably people do not have exposure to any alternative ways of criminal way of living because of legal consequences, etc. So if the only exposure to this is that movie and are those media that is skewed and is a misinterpretation, we say that is what drives the public opinion. But third, and this is important, media like to pretend as if the portrayal is based on reality. We say that the only type of media which slightly aligns with the benefits of opposition wanted to speak about in this debate is those that like to say they are based off of factual cases. So let's deal with this as well. Even these cases are tweaked from the reality, such as making the journey way more attractive, adding more characters, and adding more loopholes to the law. Or else we say this is no different from documentary and not under the fiat of this debate, which specifically talks about the content that is for entertainment. Read the info slide. Finally, let's talk about a point that people will start making meth to mimic Walter White. It is very, very unlikely that people will start mimicking Walter White. We agree that they're not going to start making meth. Probably they don't even have the capacity of doing so. However, what we posit is that it is driving public opinion for fake misrepresentation itself that is the problem. As I said, little shifts in individual mind is eventually what decides huge social consequences. Now let's talk about their second main point on awareness, on how they humanize criminals. First point, the reason behind why criminals commit crimes is extremely skewed in their world, because reasons such as being poor, living in a dire situation are inherently boring, and people because of that, but also due to the positive feedback loop, now the Walter White movie does not work. The reason that Walter White committed into the crime does not work anymore. So now generally media has to create even more and more extreme reasons as to why you opted into that crime to make more audience watch the movie now. That is the reason why the being poor that many media already portrayed, those causes are unlikely to get attention in their world. But also, let's talk about the second point on criminals are likely to succeed in the media. We have 2 points under this. First, this is a tension in their case because the claim that criminals are likely to fail and the claim that you're humanizing criminals cannot coexist. If criminals are humanized and you feel so bad and you want audience to feel bad about them, probably media also has an incentive to make those criminals succeed at the end of the day because you want the audience to feel good about the movie and want to be entertained and feel that the main character succeeded and this is great. But second, we do this better. Why? Walter White, a chemistry teacher who was doing well, opted into the crime himself. And this was not because of dire circumstances, Judge. This is not because there were any alternatives than the crime. This was because he wanted to find, quote to quote, a meaning in life. Meaning to say, all the causes that criminals opt into the crimes at the first place in those media are based on skewed reasons that do not exist in the reality. We say what we do in our world, we show the intersectionality of the causes of opting into the crime. That this is not because you suddenly want to find meaning in life. This is the drug cartels exist because they cannot find any other way of living. This is because they're extremely poor. They need to feed their dying brother. These are the real reasons that we portray in our world. But finally, we would say the worst case, this doesn't really matter if criminals actually succeed at the end of the day, as Waan already answered in the POI, because even if the criminals fail, we say that the process in which the criminals go through, laughing with their partner, saying that this is so great, this itself prevents audience from having any awareness, because they will just think, oh, that person opted into the crime himself. They're feeling good in the process of crime. Why should he help criminals at the end of the day? That is why we get humanization of criminals. We also get real awareness of issues at the end of the day. They're not arguing under the fiat. But now let's go on the extension on impacts of normalization and misinterpretation. We say these impacts are largely three things. First is eroded trust and legal representation. When you actively place the focus on the life of the criminal, then you subconsciously and simultaneously show that government is an inadequate institution. For instance, if you see a criminal having fun while smuggling drugs, then it indirectly implies that the police or the government are ineffective forms of enforcement to the audience. But second, on undermining law and order. Note that law and order are seen as inherently flimsy in this film because the criminals, being the main character, always find loopholes in law. Meaning to say, criminals will make police cars drive under the cliff, pretend as if they are captors, and walk out of jail. These films make it very easy and simple to escape. These undermine the effort that the government spends, the law and order, and the capacity of legal facilities and the CJA system. This is what prevents any individuals, especially rich individuals, from investing into legal representation, investing into these facilities, and trusting the government to maintain the law and order. This is what they do. But finally, on the risk of imitation, now that crimes are no longer actively condemned or filled with negative perceptions, but seen as a part of life, meaning that there's less reasons for people to pursue. There are more reasons for people to look up to the criminal lifestyle or even want to do violent actions. But at the very minimal case, we say that watching these violent actions and seeing that these are actually probably okay things or normal things also drive people to be slightly violent in their own daily lives as well, even if they won't necessarily opt into drug cartels, because these crimes are seen as normal things. We say no representation is better than misrepresentation. Very, very proud to propose.
When I look at movies, I don't seek accurate representation. I see young Sheldon, a really, really talented boy, go to like university at the age of 9. I don't think that's a realistic thing. So when government side says they want accurate representation, we say that they're using the wrong medium to do so. If you want accurate representation, you already have the news, you already have documentaries. Why must we sacrifice entertainment in order to do so? Is the answer that the government failed to answer in this question. But not only this, it also affects the incentive people seek when viewing these media. That is what they failed to explain in their case, and that is why it greatly harms the extent to which they can prove their impact. Two rebuttals. Firstly, on misrepresentation. They say that there is no other source of information on criminal life. Well, to start with, there's the news, which we believe a lot of people, more often than they see movies, it's more accessible. It is more, people view it as a more credible source of information. People can search the internet and see a lot of criminals. A lot of criminals. We see that this premise that there is no other source of information on criminal life is very skewed characterization and very cherry-picked. There are journals, there are fiction, there are literature. Literally, the Bible says it's bad to steal. Like, we don't understand why there is no other source of information on criminal life. But let's take their best case scenario. Let's say that this is a person who has had no previous exposure to criminal life before watching this movie. Then what impact would watching this movie have on them? Are they suddenly going to see that, oh, we can commit crimes? Like, oh, it's possible to make amphetamine. Are they is the impact that they are implying is that they're likely going to turn into a criminal because they have conceded that that is not the case? Then what is the impact of this argument about misrepresentation? We are not unclear. Second rebuttal on how they humanize criminals, and it's about how we provide only skewed reasons that do not exist in reality. But Judge, the problems of the US healthcare system do exist in reality. People do go into poverty. People are scared of calling an ambulance because the healthcare costs are so dire. People do get, Walter White only turns to drugs because he caught cancer himself and cannot afford the costs. In Uzalt, he only commits money laundering because only as a result of being being in such abject poverty. A lot of these movies, we said that it is likely that these characters have a better reason than just find a meaning of life to commit these crimes, because movies need to have complex characters. They cannot be just simple. As they have told us, it needs to be a relatable situation. What would the audience relate to more? Just committing crimes for the fun of it, or having a reason, backstory behind it that made them commit the crime? And this is why their response to our first speaker's argument about these movies serving as a societal commentary that highlights the problems of the government is so important. When they say it highlights the government's inadequacy and institutional problems, we said that even if that is true, that is what we will celebrate, because the government does have problems. Yes, the government does spend a lot on legal enforcements, but that does not mean, but once they simplify the criminals under their side of the house, portraying them as a crime, it portrays the criminals as if the government has no reasons to do so. We say that these serve as very, very valuable societal commentary. In Joker, when he does not have the government cut funding to these mental asylums, although he does make money in the middle of the movie, but he still ends up in a mental asylum, and it still highlights the issue of insufficient funding in mental institutions. This moves on to our clarification of what is glorified and what is not glorified in this movie. What is glorified in this movie? The extent of crime, the heist, the thrill, being chased by the police, the successful crimes, the attractive actors, and they look cool. But what is not glorified in these movies, and we have gave you countless examples that in all of these endings, they end up divorced, they lose family, they are in constant state of anxiety. They can no longer see their children. They end up homeless. They end up repenting at the end of Uzarals. And at the end of Narcos, he actually ends up in prison. What part of this does not show the actual consequences of these crimes? We say that rather the glorification only serves to highlight how great the damage is, how great the fall is when you fall from a successful criminal to where you end up at the end of the movie. But let's take the best case scenario again. If people are as receptive to seeing the glorified parts of these crimes, they must be also as perceptive to understanding the consequences of the crimes. Understand the movie does not only show the good parts of the crime. The movie has to have a complex plot, the climax, and the resolution. The resolution in all examples we have showed you are the most popular crime series, and they all showed the criminals devastated at the end of the movie. That is why it serves as a valuable societal commentary.
POI.
Yes.
So if you say that people only watch this for entertainment and they know that it's fiction, then how do you prove your point about awareness, and why would people, identify this as a societal issue in the first place?
People identifying this as a societal issue is engaging with your side's metric of you wanting to use entertainment as a means to promote social issues. Even if that is not the case, we still have the social utility of these shows having entertainment, which will be our team's third argument about about the value of entertainment as social utility. We told you that these shows highlight the extent of crime, show the best case scenario can end up as being a criminal, just to show you how great the fall is. If this is not the case, if they only show I don't know what even accurate representation will look like under their side of the house, but television will be dull. It harms the movie's storytelling ability. If they want to promote social issues, people will not watch the movie because it is boring from the get-go. If the actors are unattractive, if the criminals are so simple-minded that their actions are so predictable, they commit a crime, they fail, and what is even accurate representation? We want it to be fun. We say that the huge portion of entertainment industry depends on this. If we have dull TV shows, the storyline cannot make sense. So you cannot even communicate any social narratives through entertainment. So so at the end of the day, we say that TV shows show the complex and nuanced narrative of how and why criminals become criminals. And even if that is not the case, they serve as valuable entertainment. Proud to oppose.
Crime is not meant to be the topic of storytelling. You're not supposed to have a fun time hearing about crime. It's not supposed to be interesting and eye-catching. So we think it's unjust for DLO to come into this debate and say that they want to have entertainment and use it as a social utility, right? Because they want to say that it gives a platform, it captivates people. But as we told you in both of our previous speakers, if that representation is incorrect, we're fine with having no representation. But note that we also proved to you why at the end of the day, we do win on the clash of representation as well. A few quick callouts before I go on into the issues. You cannot have unbelievable fictional portrayal of crimes as well as the issue of awareness. Note that they failed to respond to the POI we just delivered on how if you're also going to say that it's fictional and they're not going to really believe it, then they're not going to believe it, criticize it, humanize it, or whatever verb they use under their world as well. We say that the changing the frame of glorification based on what you want to argue itself is what makes them lose this debate. Also, note that none of them really actually give us a clear definition, nor do they understand what glorification is. First speaker goes on talking about how crime will fail, then second speaker says they're glorifying success criminal cases. They cannot pick and choose what to glorify in these films. We would say that it's the entire plot that you're supposed to glorify. But why is this also true? Why is this also true just likely within the film industry itself, right? If you're a film director, you don't care about the criminal. You want to optimize and maximize your sales, and therefore you're more likely going to glorify each and every part of it because it's naturally thrilling. You want to have a thriller ending, you want to have a thriller beginning, you want to have a thriller middle portion as well, meaning to say that every part of the way you want to add this thrill, which means you actively take away from representation. With that said, let's go right on into the first issue on who provides an accurate representation of criminal life. What do we tell you in this debate? We tell you that there's a distortion of criminal life. These films need to make money off of viewership. So they're going to do two main things. First of all, they need to show what viewers want to see. But second of all, they also need to make things look interesting. How do they try to rebut to our case? They say that they can criticize criminals in these films from their first speaker. Note that if it is true that these are fictional films on our side, then they can argue that viewers will also come into the theater with a serious mindset thinking, you know what, I want to criticize and judge whether this person was in the right or wrong. But besides, this is not the definition of glorification. If the opposition's ultimate goal is to criticize these criminals, there's no difference from the case on our side, our comparative, which goes ultimately unrebutted to. We do it far better as well. I'll do this later on in my comparative. Then they talk about how they can humanize criminals through glorification. Two responses here. First of all, let's clarify what humanizing looks like. We would say that humanizing something is to make it relatable so that you can empathize with it as a fellow human watching other people. Therefore, because of these emotions, you then think it is an issue that should be solved yourself. Then secondly, humanizing criminals does not occur through glorification. Why is this so? Criminals become less relatable. Glorification means it will show criminals having fun and actively enjoying their experience. So why would people have an incentive to support and send help for these criminals if clearly they're having the time of their lives? It looks like they opted into the crime. They came in with the choice, and it looks like they're having fun as well. Without glorification on our side, we show the reality. Criminals commit crimes because they had no other choice. They were in a dire situation. They needed to feed themselves. They needed to feed their families. And because of this context that you provide accurately under our world, criminals commit crimes because they had no other choice. And this was a way of survival. This makes it much more appealing for people who want to help people who are struggling. So of that group of people who come into these theaters wanting to watch these shows and do something about it, we take those people on our side of this debate. They also make it a less serious issue by adding just more fun elements and thrillers in general. Some issues need to be portrayed as it is. For example, we don't make societal issues like abortion or racism into quote-unquote fun forms of media because the seriousness of the issue reflects the significance of the issue. The more important it is, the more serious you need to deal with it, because the moment you get it wrong, the moment you portray it in an incorrect way, to try to reverse that misconception about that serious issue will take even more resources and even more money. It is the same reason why issues make people uncomfortable. Then they go on to some other points, right? They say that people want to avoid the fate of Walter White. Note that imitation is the lowest hanging fruit in this debate. Obviously, I don't want to become a narco saint after watching Breaking Bad. Then they also talk about that bad guys will be eventually made bad, like have miserable endings at the end. Two issues here. First of all, why is this unlikely to actually happen in most glorification films? The criminals in the film are not portrayed as the quote-unquote bad guys. They are the protagonists, not the antagonists. In most of these films, they are the anti-hero who the audience is supposed and designed to support. So from the perspective of a film director making these films, you don't want your protagonist to meet a bad ending. Sure, Breaking Bad may have had Walter die, but at least he died with the happy ending because he found purpose in life. Audiences want entertaining forms of media, and we think that the story of a protagonist succeeding and being able to continue on their life is most effective at addressing this audience demand, but also most addressing the money within your pockets. But second of all, why is this not good enough to criticize crime? We told you in response to DLO's POI and Jeannie's speech that the initial process of showing fun and having certain excitements and thrills within the process of crime is in and of itself showing that you have a good time. It's not enough to show that you're going to have a bad ending ultimately. Why is it so? This is because humans are inherently short-sighted, right? They can't see into the future, meaning that if the immediate benefit is being able to have the time of your life, then that is still a benefit. However, in the long run, if you show people like Walter White dying, they're not going to immediately associate that with their life, because they're going to think, oh, I have to do exactly what Walter White did for me to have the same fate. So as long as I avoid this and this and this, I'll still have fun, but I won't reach that same fate. Moving on to DLO, there are other sources of information, and this ultimately takes down the entire case. News does not show the perspective of a criminal. There are real legal consequences that prevent reporters and journalists from being able to cover the backstories of real criminals. And if you're given a film and a news report, obviously you're going to choose the film or movie over that written source or document. Therefore, we utilize the social utility better because we give an accurate depiction instead. Then let's give a quick comparative. First, on criticizing institutions, they say that on their side, they're able to criticize things like US healthcare because they show how bad the situation is. If you want to show how bad the situation is, you might really show how the situation is in society, which is what we do when you have accurate of films or documentaries showing how the real causes and effects of the real criminals within society as well. That's the moment you see, oh, not only are the medical systems within these movies bad, but the medical systems within my own life, within my own neighborhood, within my own country are as corrupt and incapable as well. When it comes to humanizing criminals, we do it better, right? Because we show that it was out of fear, it was out of no choice, and it was out of poverty, and because of that, you're more likely to help. We bring in both political reform, but we also bring about better awareness as a whole under our world exclusively, and that's why, because I've proven to you all those reasons, we win this debate. Proud to propose.
We agree that Walter White may have found his value at the end, but if you weigh it, in the end, he dies, and also he loses all of his family, and actually he regrets all his life and all his choices of being a drug dealer. We are not glorifying crime. We are showing the best case of crimes that may happen. We may be exaggerating, but that is just to make the fall and the consequences of that more dramatic and more impactful to the audience. So moving on to the first clash, which is which side actually decreases crime rate and act as a more impactful source. What government talked about is how we are misrepresenting and we lack the truth of information of a real criminal life, so people might enter like without knowing the full information. First of all, first rebuttal, not all of the plots are actually misrepresented, and a lot of the story are actually from true story, and the nature of the story is that there's a climax and resolution. So what we're doing is we're glorifying like maybe their initial success in the middle of the story in their climax, but then we show the worst case as the resolution of the story of them like either dying or like being broke and depressed and how they lose all their loved ones. And this just makes drug dealing and makes crime more transparent, because we show how it can be so good on one side but also so bad on the other side. So then let's talk about how we can lead to more like information and transparent information about what a criminal life is. Because think about it, are you going to watch a top 1 ranked like Breaking Bad series and entertaining series of criminal life, like even though it might be exaggerated, or a dual documentary that just shows the pure reality of criminal life? Obviously you're going to watch one. Like both sides agrees that we gain more attention, and this then releases more information because we show like the best case, as I've said, and the worst case of how a criminal could be like. So with more attention, there will be more people watching ours and gaining more attention and gaining more information about what it could be like and how bad the consequence can be in a criminal being a criminal. They also talked about how we normalize crime as they're portrayed not that bad. However, we think even though if that happened, if we might have to like exaggerate some parts of their success on Gulf Road, where there's no like engaging series of criminal life, nobody's going to be bothered to like look at those dual documentaries. There's certainly no incentive, and therefore on the government side, there's not enough information about what a crime actually looks like, and also there won't be as impactful consequences, because in the documentary their life is going to basically be flat and blah. Therefore, with rise and also a fall, this makes the impact so much more greater. So how do we send a more like great message? Because we prove to you why like its companies are likely to follow the market demands, and people are naturally wanting to see happy ending. So that's why most of the cases the villains get punished after they have like some kind of success, after they're glorified, and those punishments are what the public wants. And that's why those like Breaking Bad or like Narcos, they're all famous because they have a bad consequence, and all the villains in the end either die or end really badly. This is the most effective way of emphasizing, because when people see these criminals getting so bad consequences with like the big contrast of what they can get, they will be more impactful for those people, and they won't be likely to follow this kind of crime thing. And they're only taking their best case where these criminals are like protagonists like Batman, but the majority of the movies portray like actual criminals who kill, who like rob and rape, who harm others. Let's move on to clash number 2, which is which side can actually facilitate societal discourse. They talked about how movies are only for entertainment, so they can't be educational. Yes, we agree the priority of movies are entertaining, and that's why people watch them. But with entertaining purpose and attention, this actually naturally thrives, like more people are having more deep discussions. And people who watch the movie, they don't just watch it like, they don't want a protagonist with no story. They want a protagonist who has a unique story, who has a reason to do a crime. They are not just interested in psychopaths who just simply kills. And this is where the entertainment comes from. Like, for example, people watch Joker for entertainment, like to like gain entertainment, but the rise of the Joker movie gains attention and has created so much discussion of like critiques and analysis of what actually caused Joker to be that crazy man. What is the environmental causes? There are so many YouTube videos, and we even learn it in like language and literature in school of what is the actual societal cause and the problem with society's like resources. So what glorification does is that it humanizes criminal. For example, breaking news, the main character got cancer and there wasn't protection for medication fee, and that's why he eventually goes to deal with drugs. And these are all realistic portrayals of those criminals who actually features important societal problems. And this is important as it is a realistic problem in the society, and it is the main cause of main reason why people actually choose to do crime, because they have no other choices. For example, healthcare like system in Joker, like the government cut out funding for poor people's healthcare. That's why Joker in the end turns like so crazy and kills so much people like with no drugs, because he didn't have like the medicine, and that's why he got crazy in the end. So, but also Joker, he has that moment of glorification where like everyone, like the poor's all like supports him, but in the end Joker still loses all of his family and connection, and he's still stuck in a mental hospital, living in like dying in solitude. So what we have uniquely is definitely more attention and more discussion about societal problems, which can increase the societal discourse and resources. But we're not rationalizing these criminal actions, but we're just encouraging more critical and deep analysis of the problems in the society that actually pushes the people to extreme. Therefore, we actually solve one big reason of why people become criminals. Therefore, more than proud to.
So at the end of the day, what do audiences want out of watching a movie? There are several, this is on a spectrum. First, we can say that they view it simply as an entertainment. This is where they can differentiate. They think film and reality are entirely different. Under these types of audience, both teams, it's a wash. Both teams gain no impact because they're not going to think just because a movie was fun, they're not going to think that issue is light because they differentiate film and reality. Just because they saw a social issue raised in the film, they're not going to think it exists in real life under the same mechanism. Or they might have a more serious attitude. They might be a movie critique or movie analyst, or it may be an English literature lesson in school where we have to watch movies with a serious attitude. Under that scenario, we told you that watching a movie with a serious attitude is not thinking that the movie is what a movie is different from not realizing that the movie is an exaggeration, but more of it as is closer to using that movie as a platform and an opportunity to discourse the things that happen in the movie. That's why we told you it's important that movies serve as a commentary to the society on issues like the US healthcare, on how it is too expensive, or maybe the law enforcement is flawed. That is what we gain when audiences have a serious attitude. Or we can reach a middle ground. Maybe you just want where viewers relate with certain parts in the movie to a certain extent. We say that this looks like, hey, they know that some parts of the movie are exaggerated, but and they know that it is still unreasonable to distribute methamphetamine even if you need money. Like like relating to only certain parts of the goods and bads of the crime to a certain extent applies to both the good and the bad, and realizing the consequences. In these audiences, what does government side want out of these audiences? They say that we want people to see crime as a serious thing. I think that is essentially what they boil down to. And they say that this will be used for political reform. But there are still so many questions left. What political reforms? To what extent are you going to be able to facilitate political reforms by audiences being able to see crimes as a serious thing? See, their mechanism, the underlying mechanism of this whole impact was one-liner. That's they're going to have an accurate representation. So they're going to see crimes as a serious thing. What have we offered you? What mechanisms have we offered you as a comparative? We told you that these movies are attention grabbing because they offer you the thrill. We told you that the glorification of the success of the crime highlights the dire consequences of these criminals at the end of the movie, the resolution of the movie. What government side essentially wants to communicate through movies is that crimes are bad, but what we on their opposition highlights societal changes that may be needed and provides a platform for societal discourse. And if all goes bad, hey, it's fun. It's ranked 1 in Netflix. People, regardless of whether you want whether entertainment exists or not, people want crime story. It has existed since the Greek and Roman tragedies. But at the end of the day, they still haven't answered to us what accurate representation looks like. Are they portraying criminals as simple-minded people who have no reason for committing crimes and just commit crimes for fun? What audiences would want to watch this movie? Why would that be relatable? We gave you structural reasons why movies are going to have complex meanings and gave you countless examples. Movies need a climax and a resolution. Movies need to have a complex character who is not just flat. These characters need to have a backstory that is reasonable to an extent why they committed the crime. They need to be exciting for the audience. Under their side, do all criminals get caught in the movie, and does that communicate that the crime is serious? Under our side, we have entertainment, but we can also provide societal discourse. Proud to oppose.
Judge, let me end the debate with the first words I said in today's debate. Misrepresentation is still worse than no representation. We expected opposition to rebut this point, but because we literally repeated this line 5 or 6 times. But what we got instead was a flimsy case with extremely convoluted framing, still unsure goal, and absolutely no engagement. A criminal hero driving police cars into the ocean, escaping from the jail by tricking all the captors, and finding the purpose of life in dealing drugs. Yes, Walter White died at the end, just like every other human being, but he showed us how dealing drugs can be a way to restore masculinity and make new friends in life. We think this is a problem. If you're confused, Judge, we don't think that you're alone. Two questions I have for the opposition case. So first, what does their word look like? They changed their stance on the definition of what glorification looked like throughout the debate. We still don't know what their world looked like, how they choose what to glorify and what not to glorify. We clearly told you they have no choice but to glorify the entire way of life of these criminals. But second, what is the goal of the opposition side? Like, what are they trying to achieve? They push for awareness, but also argue that people do not take movies, films properly, which we already clarified. We still get no engagement. They provided 3 benefits, which we all, take down. First, they talk about how they can able to call out government's fault. There's no incentive of media companies, we said, like, to make representations that help criminals and create social change. Like, they have no obligation to address any of the social issue. As a provider of entertainment, they have no duty. And we also told you that these form of media change based on consumer need. So this is why, they're unable to call out government's faults. But second, they talk about how they humanize criminals and gain support. They talk about the Joker and how people will similarly learn the lessons, like the incentives behind criminal behavior and relate with them. This is clearly not exclusive to their side. We told you that we're okay with films realistically portraying criminal ways of life. We show reality. We show that this was the only way for a criminal to, prepare bread for the family. We told you that, like, we portray that this is the only way of criminals. This way, like, even if we buy the case that our audiences aren't going to watch our films, at least our side removes all the chances of wrongful misrepresentation. There is no chance in which resources are going to be wasted to solve wrong issues on our side. And finally, we spread awareness on the real issue, because they said, because this was the easiest ground in which Prop won this debate, because the only rebuttal coming from them was a misrepresentation of the media that it is accurate. We conceded that forms of media like Breaking Bad gain more attention. We already made that trade-off. But we also told you that attention does not matter when the series are misrepresenting the issue. So people are going to be aware of the wrong reality. They also said that they increased the impact of the films by showing the best scenarios and worst scenarios, and that impact, shock impact. But we told you that impact is very minimal. If the ultimate goal is to show how bad the situation are for criminals, why not just show that? If the goal of the both sides is to prevent people from entering crime, the film should just never show any good. Instead, they should just show that all of the crime is bad and that there is no good outcome at all. That is what we do under our side. But also, this only proper engagement on the point of awareness, which we pushed from our first, came at opposition whip. So, Judge, we clearly should not buy it, even in the best scenario. So let me end my reply speech in a clear and simple world comparison. Let's be very charitable and say, if in our very worst case, we buy all of their points, we have absolutely no representation. No one watches our boring films and news reports. As we've repeated so many times, we say that no representation is still better than misrepresentation. We still have all those resources. We have potential to solve that in another day. In the best case of their side, though, let's say they accurately represent the crimes while showing thrill. We told you that the moment that there is any form of thrill or enjoyment about such social issue that should be addressed with significant, seriousness, then it shows that every now and then crime can be fun. We're not willing to take that risk, because if there's even a slight chance, 0.0000001% chance for someone to think that criminal life can be cool, then there's a slight chance for that someone to commit crime or violence or alter their perspective to condone that sort of behavior. We don't want people to think, even for the slightest moment, the fraction of a second, to think that crime is something that is a viable choice. We think that people should consider it as a serious issue as it is in reality. As Seunghun said in his speech, we think that some issues need to be, remaining as serious. Things like abortion, racism, sexism, those things aren't made into fun movies. We think that is same for criminals. Thank you.